I'm going to tell you a story that happened long time ago and far away, but it's a true story and it is my story. My name is Jacobina and I am an artist. I'm an oil painter and I started painting a long time ago, but like 20 years ago I started to be serious about my art. And this was on the verge. I was invited to paint a big mural for the University of Miami in Florida in the United States. And I also was invited for a painting week in the Netherlands. I am Dutch and I was coincidentally from the area that the painting week was going to held in. This was an old artist colony called Domburg, where Piet Mondrian, who has work in the United States in museums here, but he came there every year for a very long time. Year after year he would visit that with other artists. So it was an artist colony of 100 years ago that kind of died over the years. A family doctor of that village had this idea that he wanted to revive this. And he wanted the best of the best artists, or the most promising artists, to come back and paint and be together for a week. So he flew to Russia, to the Academy of Fine Arts in St. Petersburg, to see if he could find the best painters at the time. He also went to Argentina because he loved tango, and he wanted to bring artists who were also interested in maybe painting the tango, the dancers. All in all, he had this grandiose idea of a huge energy thing for artists, for visitors, for sponsors, for everybody to enjoy. And I was invited to come and participate. Now I have to tell you that they would pay the airfare, they would pay the lodging, they would pay all the meals, they would pay materials for us, and they would also provide models dressed in traditional clothing, but also nude models. Everything was super fine organized. If we didn't want to participate, fine, but it was kind of required of us to engage with the public during these painting sessions and allow the public to be part of this. I just can't tell you how excited I was for all of this. It was like a total dream come true, a life dream. And what was more, it was in my birth grounds. It was the grounds that my ancestor lived since the 1400s. Let me tell you a little bit about that grounds. It was a bunch of islands and peninsulas that were there long time ago. Actually, the cities, the big cities like Zierikzee and Middelburg, were cities that were already existing and blooming way before Amsterdam existed. Now, Amsterdam is like 700 years old or something. So they were the top cities of the Netherlands centuries ago. The trade was by boats, and they were trading with the courts in Paris. And they were trading something that is interesting for artists as well. They found a dye that only grew there, and it's a root. The dye comes from the root, and the dye is a red called alizarin crimson, and it was the darkest red that they could make in those days. They didn't have any artificially made colors. They had to make it from earthy things. So that dye, alizarin crimson, was their biggest trade with the French courts, and it made them wealthy. They were wealthy. They built elaborate houses with gilded ornaments and had gold around their head. The women were dressed with gold ornaments and white caps, and every island had a different costume, a different traditional costume. But the basic truth was all they had gold around their heads and a white cap. And these people in models now, dressed in these costumes, were our models. Another thing was, it's very important, the area is called Zeeland, sea, land. So it's a bunch of islands in the middle of the North Sea. And every so often, almost every 100 years, there was a big flood. And whole cities would disappear. And that's how they eventually learned to protect themselves from the violence of the sea. It's called sea land. They always lived with the sea on their mind and on the land. It's a rich, very rich country. They had all the various food possible. But it also was destroyed on a regular basis. So when I was painting all these elements, I was just practicing. I really was just looking how to perfect my skill, how to do plein air painting, how to mix the colors. I was not sure at all of what this was going to be. Back home in America, I perfected my art even more. I was living in Indianapolis. I had a great studio in the Stutz building, and I got invited again. Now I was more prepared, and I had some material. So I prepared my trip a lot better. I also knew I wanted to paint bigger, and I was looking for a theme, but I couldn't find it that easy. So I kind of made a collage of all the elements I was working on the year before. It had a woman with a headdress, with a traditional headdress, and it had one of the nude models. It had the sea, it had some historic buildings, and I piled it all up in a painting. And that painting was sold on opening day. And I was so excited about all of this. Maybe I could become a real painter and be really good at that. I also knew I still had a lot to learn, but I thought this could be my theme. And during the year that I was back in the United States, I was thinking about the meaning of the painting, because I'm a deep thinker. I like to make sense of the world. I see a lot, I observe a lot, not only objects, but also the dynamics between people, the history, all that. I love to make sense of it. And at the end of the year, I really thought, I know what it means. I know that this is my own vulnerability in a pretty aggressive culture of America. And the sea is the dynamics of all the people around me and everything. So I had this meaning in the back of my head, and I was excited to share that with the owner of the painting, who also happened to be the sponsor of the event. And again, I was invited for the third time. Excited to share this insight with the owner. I was a little bit early to see my family and friends, and I went to the paint store to buy some brushes and some stuff for myself that I could bring back to America. And this was also an art store, but also a frame shop, and that happens a lot. There I got the shock of my life. This painting, at first I didn't recognize it. It was only the head was framed. So my painting was cut up, completely destroyed, basically, and only the head was framed. And I asked the store owner, what happened here? Well, the owner wanted to cut it up. And I thought, no, this is intellectual property. I figured out what the whole painting in its entirety meant. You cannot just do that. So I gave him a call and I said, what is this? So then we met and he apologized. But we met for a very long time and we talked about art, and I actually totally forgot about the hurt of the cut-up painting. He was really interested in what I was doing, and he was interested in me as a person. And later, his wife apologized that it was her idea. But the more I more thought about this, the more I thought, but this is really bad. This is a very aggressive act of jealousy, which was true. She cut up something of me I had identified with it. And then the owner said, okay, he paid me $10,000 to shut up, basically, which I thought, it's not about the money. But I agreed, and I also had to agree that I would never see the guy ever again. And the year after, I started thinking about more and more again. What happened here? What is this? I was married at the time, and my husband knew that, my ex-husband, knew that something happened there. And he called every guy that was participating with foul language because he thought I had an affair with one of them or more of them. I never had an affair with a sponsor. We never even kissed. But I did feel what true love, how it felt. And I thought, if I'm married to a guy that does not give me the same feeling of love, then that's not okay. I cannot lie. I cannot pretend like that's not the case. So I left the marriage, basically. And I hoped the guy did that as well. But he didn't. And then the whole dark feeling around all this stayed with me for a long time because it meant he was trapped. He was trapped, he was brainwashed in a marriage that did not feel like love at all. Now I was free, but like the whole history stayed with me for a very long time. It never had closure, really. I never saw the guy again. And the only thing I could do was paint the painting again. Because I thought, I'm still alive. I'm not dead. And since it's my intellectual property, I can paint it again. But now it had a much, much deeper meaning. By leaving my husband, I realized how scary America is for a woman alone. The sharks are everywhere. And I was afraid of that. That's why I stayed for a long time with my ex-husband. But now I was feeling it full force. And I felt frightened and not prepared. I was so vulnerable. And I mean, the anxiety was day in, day out was there. I lost the little money I got from my ex. I lost everything, and there was no help. I was all alone in an aggressive, I think aggressive country where everything is about money. I had no friends. I had no, my social world was built around my husband, not around me. And I moved back to Florida. My family was far away. My mother was dying. Much later, my father was dying too, but it was all in a different country. I was fairly confused for a long time. But I could paint the painting again. And this vulnerability now was much bigger. But I also saw its strength of the naked woman emerging out of a violent sea. And I didn't tell you this, but the slogan of my country, of my district, is Lukter et emergo. And it means I struggle and survive, I emerge. I struggle, I emerge. And that was what the painting was all about. It was my personal story, but it was also the story of my ancestors, because they always survived. They lived where they really wanted to live. And they lived with the sea, they lived with the violence, and they became very strong inside. That's my story, and I would love to share it with the world.